All right, let's do it. So I'm Andrew Box, owner of In the Box Consulting. It's really kind of a one-man show. Data, data engineering, analytics and data science are kind of where my focus is. My background's in life sciences, actually. So I was at the Stowers Institute for many years. That's where I worked with Lindsay and some of the other folks on here that I know. And I was in different lab environments there, and eventually was doing enough, data analytics and some of it kind of big data and genomics related that I just got really interested in that, and kind of moved into IT. And then nobody really wanted to spearhead trying to build kind of a warehouse with some, governance there. And so I sort of got saddled with it, but I also thought it could be cool. And then that's really where I got interested in more of like data warehousing, and the actual sort of data engineering side in addition to data science. So that's where I'm coming from. My degrees are all biology and life sciences, but I've been into other stuff in the last few years. It's gotten me into the fun world of business and finance and ERPs and all that stuff. All right, so that's who I am. So just a short preview. These are kind of the overview, the topics I want to hit. Um, this is kind of geared not to be like a total intro, but it's, not a bunch of real niche topics, but hopefully it can kind of turn people on to, what's the right workflow? What's a good workflow? Because I remember when I was learning Power BI, they make it real easy to click the get data button. Um, but there's a little bit of a, learning curve to get from there to, okay, I really feel like I know what I'm doing, and I'm building visualizations the right way, and my measures are accurate and that sort of thing. So this is just kind of the workflow that most people probably use, and um, certainly that I do. So BI, you guys probably, I don't need to preach to the choir, you know what BI is, but essentially, being able to make business decisions off of a bunch of different, kinds of data, typically different sources. So the architecture that a lot of people will see is, you've got a bunch of source systems that are handling different aspects of your business. Could be inventory, ordering, point of sale. Usually you'd pull that together, just dump it all into like a data lake, which is really just a giant file share thing that you can query. And then probably put that into a data warehouse, which is really just kind of a special kind of database, and build some views and that are, good for reporting, where you kind of mash all these sources together. If you have a customer ID in marketing and you got a customer ID in point of sale, you might, match those up and make a view that kind of combines it. Then ultimately go to your BI tool, Power BI or Tableau, whatever the case may be, or Excel. Even really honestly, Excel was kind of the original BI tool. And you can do it this way too. You don't have to have a warehouse. You can build a big data model in Power BI, but there can be limits. You end up kind of putting business logic into your Power BI data model, which can obfuscate things. It's not wrong. There are certainly cases where it could be appropriate, but once you get past a certain size and complexity, having that warehouse or something that's a middle layer, becomes useful. All right, compared to Excel, I get this question a lot, and it was certainly something I wondered is, I can go to Excel, I can import data, it actually has Power Query. I can make a bunch of different types of graphs and pivot tables. What's really the difference? And, Power BI can do a lot more in terms of sort of calculating complex measures that are kind of similar to how you use a formula in Excel. There's more types of visualizations with a lot more options for how you want to sort of not just format, but even how you want to have the data drive what the visualization does in terms of, okay, the count of customers last year drives what color my dot is or something. They're more interactive. So if you have a pie chart next to a table, you can click a slice of the pie chart and it'll filter down the table. Scalability, Excel no longer has like a really small limit of how much data it can run, but the performance starts to fall off. Um, if you're beyond some certain point, what that is probably depends on the computer you're on. Excel is pretty much going to run locally, or depending on how you got it set up. So scalability is one of the issues. Power BI can really scale like really, really big. Tens of millions of rows is fine, unless there's some kind of problem. And then there's better collaboration. So, once you publish a report, you can put it in a workspace in, 365 online, share it with people you want, put it in an app, which is kind of an embedded thing, embed it in your public facing website. And you have a lot more useful options for that sort of collaboration and sharing angle. Um, so one thing I like to do first, is like don't get in too much of a hurry. Just like start pulling in data and making graphs. Really think about what you have. Whether this is just some CSV file or whatever. And some of the questions I ask is just look through all the columns, make sure I get an idea of like which ones are continuous versus categorical, because that's going to drive how you make visuals. How do you have any data quality things you need to handle? Are there some like blank cells that need to either be 0 or NA? Um, how many categories? If you got dates? What do those look like? Kind of how's it breaking down? What else? Data range distribution. Yeah, so thinking about maybe even just as a pre-step to look at quality, look at some minimum, maximum averages, standard divs, just so you can kind of get a feel for, is this column of sales numbers right? Or is there, 10 values in there that are 7 orders of magnitude higher than they should be, which means there could be a quality issue. Um, and cardinality, how many different unique values are in columns you're using? Typically that'd be categorical data because that can affect performance, compression, and just how things look. I don't want to run through this in excruciating detail because I'm going to give a reference on it, but there's also some sort of general, you know, rules of thumb around what type of visualizations are good for what showing what kinds of things. So, bar graphs, they're good for categorical data, one colored bar per category of thing. And then you can, obviously show like numeric, on the X or Y. Column graph, same idea. Pie charts, proportion or percentage of a whole is where they shine. Line graphs is where you probably want to be with like continuous data, things that are not discrete categories, but really just a range anywhere between 0 and whatever it is that could be decibel or something. Scatter plots are kind of the same. Those are good for showing like, clusters of different kinds of things that might be similar. I could plot customers by, sales number this year and also something like, number of orders shipped or something. And then I can see, hey, there's a little clump of people over here who are buying a lot or behaving in this certain way. Um, and histograms are really good. I'll use those a lot for just data quality to see what's the shape of the data. And a histogram is really just a count per value. And so those are good, have their place. It's not too often you use that in like a dashboard necessarily, but I use them a lot for just evaluating, data and kind of pre-work. This flowchart's good. We can share this out later, but sometimes this just kind of sums up really a lot of what I was saying, and kind of helps you walk through like what might be a good chart type for what I've got. And then these are good sources. Let's see, grammar of graphics, the visual display of quantitative information, and actually the Seaborn documentation, which is a Python library for visualization, has really good information on sort of, hey, when should I do this or that in terms of how I want to actually show stuff. Okay, so sort of next topic, connecting to data. And this one, Power BI does make it really easy. So it's definitely one of the places I'd say it kind of shines. Your data sources can really be almost anything, within reason, whether it's just a text file, CSV, transactional databases. So I kind of split those out as a different kind of database. So, that might be your CRM. We had like Oracle CRM as Dowers, and you can connect actually to the Oracle database directly under the hood. Whether you should do that or not depends because, your analytical, your reporting queries can slow down the source database, but you can totally do it. So, Azure SQL Server. Warehouses. So Snowflake is really popular and for good reason. It's basically a database as a service platform that has like its own Python environment. It can kind of replace what a lot of people use, Spark and Databricks for. Redshift is the AWS, warehouse platform, and BigQuery is the Google warehouse platform. BigQuery is good in many ways. I really like it. And it can be pretty affordable. That's one of the things I like about BigQuery. If you're not dealing with hundreds of millions of rows and really hitting the database hard with queries all day long. Sometimes you can stay below the free tier and actually do what your business needs to do. And then last but not least, this is something I try to avoid, but sometimes it comes up and you got to do it, is you can actually write code in Power Query that directly can interact with an API and authenticate and some of that stuff. What else? So related to pulling data in, you've got these sort of one choice to make early on, which is do I use import mode or direct query? And so what that means is import mode, literally just when you refresh your data or when you connect to your data, it grabs it, pulls it into Power BI, and it's all in Power BI, which, is good in many ways because Power BI has a really good analytical and query engine, really good, compression. I think I have an example later of just how much it can compress certain data sets, but it can be, 10, 20, 50 fold. So do that if you can. Rule of thumb is really use import mode unless you've got a reason not to. Like there's so much data that it definitely is just gonna trash and crash, the Power BI engine. Um, in which case, what direct query does is it really just passes the filter down, in most cases, if you set it up right, all the way from the visual all the way into the source system database. So if I click a pie chart and I click, March sales data, what Power BI will do is actually write a SQL query, pass that down to your source. The source system will run that query and give you back just those rows. So latency, right, that takes a little half a second or a few seconds to run. It's not as snappy, but that allows you to potentially scale almost indefinitely. And then related to that, what happens to the data when I publish? Because most people are still developing in Power BI desktop, just on your laptop or on your desktop computer. It's not in the cloud. Um, I know that the cloud Power BI interface is getting pretty close to feature parity. So, I think you definitely could just do it in the cloud. Um, I like to work on the desktop because it's what I'm used to. But what happens to the data is, when you publish it out to a Power BI in, 365.com, it pushes all your data set out there, which shows up as kind of its own object alongside the report itself. And it's static until you set up the refresh. So if your data isn't going to change ever, then you're done at that point. But normally what you have to do is go into, Power BI in 365 and go set up your refresh schedule and probably tell it the authentication credentials again because it doesn't pass those through because, of the security implications of that. So how do you get data? One of them is the easy way. When you open Power BI, you'll see this screen. Um, and so all this is really going to do is behind the scenes, it actually will set up a Power Query. But if you don't have much manipulation to do, like if you're working with a data team and they've got just perfectly ready to go views in your warehouse, you could just plug into them from here and go for it. Um, I usually just go ahead and go to Power Query and pull it in because I want to see it. I want to see some of the uh, like quality metrics. I actually didn't, I should have grabbed a screenshot. We can look at it if there's time in a little bit, but Power Query gives you some metrics on sort of, I was talking about, it's nice to check the min, max, standard div, how many empty values. So Power Query will show you that. And then of course you can do a lot of transformations too. So I usually go to Power Query and then you can go up to this new query button. Is that the next slide? Yeah, it's the next slide. So to get to Power Query is what this is showing. You go to that transform data in Power BI sort of regular when it first opens, and then you can go into Power Query, which looks like this. If you don't use Power Query, it's in Excel too. So if you kind of look at the capabilities, because it can do just so much in terms of cleaning data, transforming data, performing joins and appending stuff together, that I recommend looking at it, even if you're not planning on using Power BI tomorrow, because you can use it in Excel and it's just as useful there. But yeah, you basically just go in and say, I want a new source. There's some common stuff in the dropdown on the left there, like Excel or SQL Server. And then there's an other button. And then that'll pop open a window and you can search for sources. And there's like hundreds of them. So pretty good chance your thing is in there. And then from that point, you kind of get another window that says, like over on the right hand where the navigator is, that's showing some tables in Snowflake. So you can kind of click the tables you want, then click go, and then it pulls it in here. Hey, dude, don't pull that wire. Let's see. So once you've landed your data in Power Query, now you get to see some of these quality things. So I kind of blocked it out because I was wanting to show something else, but this valid empty error, you got this and you can just see at a glance, like how much data do I have that might be bad? Like error might show up if that's supposed to be a date column, but there's some wacky thing in there that cannot be interpreted as a date. So then hey, I got to do something about that, whether it's fix it or just filter those out. You set your date types here, or your data types here. You just click that icon, and this one happens to be a date, but you can see if it's a string, it says ABC, so it kind of shows you what it is. And if you want to change it, you can click that. Sometimes I find that it brings in something I know as a whole number, as a decimal, so I change it to whole number. That helps it compress better and better represents the data type it really is. The other thing you can do is choose columns. And this is, again, just kind of showing my standard workflow. It's what I do usually every time I get started. I'll pull it in, check my data types, or maybe first choose the columns, because sometimes you've got junk columns that are like system data. In this case, I was using a tool called Airbyte to push data from SQL Server on premises into Snowflake. And I don't really need to report on these. Plus, these are all like long hashes, and those compress really badly because they're all unique. So you can't use any of the sort of tricks of compression to make it smaller and perform better. Split or trim, this is a good one. So like, I think I was showing this title field. So you can sometimes first name, last name are together. And if it's clean, you can just split it on space and then get two separate fields. Maybe you want to sort on last name. Well, it's hard to do that if they're in the same field. But then you might have something like this, product technician dash WC60. And your reporting might require that, hey, I need this thing, I need WC60. So you can go to split column, tell it I want to split it on a dash, and then what you'll get after that is two columns, one with the first part, one with the last part, and then you can kind of rename both of them and go on to your analytics. Custom columns, this can be a good place to do this. It gets a little bit complicated as to should I add custom columns here or in Power BI in the sort of data view, or should I do it using DAX code? And it depends, but for like simple stuff like this, where I just need to like subtract two things or multiply two things and calculate that column in a very reliable, consistent way, I'll do it here in Power Query, kind of upstream. There are some performance implications for various types of transactions. I guess one thing to know is that this runs at data sync. So if you do it here, this runs when you click refresh. If you do it in DAX over on the other side, it's going to do it when the data gets shown. And unless your data set's enormous, they're both probably going to work fine. But that's just a place you can sometimes do performance tuning. So you can add a calculated column and use just kind of a simple formula type language to do all kinds of things in here. You can even write functions. And enriching data, you can do that in Power Query as well. So this was a scenario where I think, what did I have? I had like had the address, or I had the latitude and longitude, and I wanted to get like the city, state, county back. And so this is just code in the M language, which is kind of, if you click advanced query on any query in Power Query, you'll see the code behind it. So you can just pop this up and write something. And so here it's actually grabbing the data I have, latitude and longitude, as columns, reaching out to the Google API geocoding endpoint, and then getting back, these values that basically tell you what it is: city, state, county. And then so to do that, so first you would kind of write that. That's a function, is what that was. And then to use it, you say, all right, now I want to add a custom column. Now I'm calling the function getCity and passing it text latitude, text longitude, and then it'll spit out the new columns on the other side. So, just an example, but, using that type of approach, you can do obviously a lot of very many different things. Just some data sets. So like, whether it's just for practicing and development, or if you actually want to go find some specific data set, this Kaggle site, it's kind of like geared towards data scientists, but there's just like all kinds of data sets that some of them are fake test data, some of them are like totally real. So I use that sometimes. I also use the Microsoft AdventureWorks data warehouse thing in SQL a lot. Let's see. Enrich customers. What am I showing here and why? Let's see, get data by text. Oh yeah, I know what I'm showing here. So I downloaded the population by zip code from Kaggle, and it's 55 megs in a raw CSV form. And then the entire Power BI file, which also has AdventureWorks in it, is 15 megs. So that's just kind of a demonstration of, the power to compress is pretty good. But I pulled that in, and then what I want to do is actually, enrich my data set with this population by zip code. And so that kind of leads us into building a data model, where I'll kind of show like how you do that, and how you relate this table to that table, which is often the case if you got like a star schema, which I think I have a slide on. But you need a date table most of the time. Of course, if you're not working with dates in any capacity, you don't probably. But what most people do, and what I typically do, is I make that date table using DAX. So now we're out of Power Query. We're done with that. We said apply, import my data back to sort of regular Power BI. Then if you go to the data view, you can actually just say, give me a new table, and then define and code what you want to do. So this is kind of typical. I'll use this a lot. Sometimes I might need like a different fiscal period, and I'll calculate that here. But here you get a nice table that has a date column that's just sort of, day, month, year. That's kind of the core of it. And then a bunch of other columns that you can use for your reporting. And then you can sometimes, depending on what you want to do, just calculate that from your data, because you could say, give me every date between 2000 and 2099. But that's a little bit inefficient. Sometimes you might need that for some reason, but if you don't, I usually just kind of set this calendar function spits out that date column basically. So I just say, all right, I want to run from min date, which is the lowest value in my sales order date, to end of year max date, which is the highest value in my sales table. So you need a date table, and you need to mark it as a date table too, which you right click it in the data view and just say mark as date table. I can show that in a second. But that tells Power BI that, hey, this is the date table, and it gives it some special functionality. Yeah, this is really just showing the calendar function again. ChatGPT can get you started with that type of thing easily enough. Just always check the docs. If it says it's going to use this function or that function, it's wise to go look at the documentation and see if it checks out what it's trying to do. Sometimes it will use Excel formulas in DAX, and that doesn't really work. It's not the same. Some of them appear to be the same or very similar, but often they don't do the same thing. So just be aware of that. Microsoft DAX documentation is good. It's got everything you need to know, but this DAX guide thing is from a group that is like really good with Power BI. They publish like the book on DAX, and that site tells you a lot more like this. This is from DAX.com, which is what's it going to return? It returns a table. What parameters does it expect, and what are they? So I use that a lot. So star schema for reporting, a lot of times it's recommended use a star schema, which is probably what you're going to implement in Power BI when you say to build your model. So what is that? And it really just means the middle here, the main table, is kind of the the instance of whatever thing it is that's kind of the core concept you're working with. So sales would be a really common one. There's a bunch of information that's just about that particular sale. And then there's a whole bunch of rows that are a whole bunch of sales. But then there's going to be columns that relate to other tables. So you could make one really wide table, and that's becoming a little bit more popular, just due to the way some of the modern data stack tools work. And it's less expensive to just make wide tables because storage is cheaper, is what it comes down to. But it's still common, even when doing that, to have some dimension tables and some fact tables. So what this does is it basically allows you to have just these different fields like order date key, that would go off to our dimension date. Now then in that date table we'd have all those other values. So they're not cluttering up this table, but it's still related to it. So it can save on data size to kind of follow a dry approach. Don't repeat yourself. And it can also help you with what you're trying to report on, because the sort of cardinality might be one to many or many to one. In which case, if you make a one wide table, now I've got to have as many rows as there are on the many side, which now I'm really repeating myself. So star schema looks like a star. You basically got a fact table in the middle, and then the dimension tables are just sort of attributes of this thing that they're related to. So somebody bought a thing and it had a product ID. Well, there's probably a bunch of stuff I can describe about the product. that I may or may not want to show in my graph or whatever. So that's what those dimension tables do. Let's see. So that's how it actually looks in Power BI. This is kind of a abbreviated example, again, from that AdventureWorks data warehouse. There's fact sales in the middle. We've got dim product, and it actually relates to product subcategory, which has information about the subcategory, and that relates to the product category, which has information about the category. And so what we did do in rich data was we actually brought in this population data. And so this now, I related this, even though it's from a totally different data source, into the geography table, because I wanted, this is population by zip code, geography had zip code, so I can put this in here and now I can do stuff and report on it if I want. You can see all your relationships. There's another way to look at them. So you can click on the lines in between the tables and it'll kind of show you some stuff. You can also go to manage relationships and see it all in one place. It will auto detect them when you first bring in your data. That can be okay. Just, definitely check it, because if all it's doing is looking for field names that are similar, and then kind of jamming that stuff together. So it's often wrong. All right. So yeah, recommend to use a star or a snowflake style schema. Snowflake is really more like an extension of the star. This is probably technically snowflake because it's out and out and out and out, but it's the same concept, more or less. Let's see. I put avoid one to many. I meant to put avoid many to many. We need to fix that. There are cases when a many to many relationship is legit, valid, and can't be avoided. A lot of the times it means you need a bridge table, though. Basically, you have a table in between what was the many to many that maps out the individual relationships. That's often helpful to add that. Avoid bidirectional filtering unless there's a reason to do it. What that means is these arrows in between the table, they tell which way this filters. So if I have a graph of geography regions, and then I have a table of internet sales, if I click a city, it'll filter the sales because it filters this direction. It won't go the other way. And sometimes it's very appropriate to use bidirectional. You can just tell this, nah, go both directions. I want to filter from here to here and the other way. But there are some implications of that. You can end up with like some circular logic that makes measures fail. So, it's just something to mention that if you do it, be intentional about it. So that's kind of that. So then, I don't know, any questions or anything? I need to like de-maximize and see if anybody raised their hand, but anything so far to talk about? All right. What else? So the interface. So yeah, now we're in Power BI in kind of the mode where we want to build some charts and graphs and visualizations. This way of looking at it, I think, might still be preview. I don't know if anybody knows, but it's an option you have to turn on to have these little buttons here so that you can quickly toggle your panes. But that's what these are, is basically, there's a bookmarks one that I don't have turned on, but bookmarks are a way to like save a state. So, if you want to make a button that says filter 1976 sales, you could actually like set your filter to 1976 and then save a bookmark and then add a button that ties to the bookmark. You can get pretty complicated with that and do some cool stuff that makes it almost seem like it's like a web page. But this is what the UI is. Data shows your data. So you can search in here for a field. And the reason, hang on, I went dead. Let me look at my battery. That would be sad. I just had it on the charger. No, it's full. Probably just a glitch, hopefully. I'll blame the cat. I saw him walk by a minute ago. Yeah, so this is your layout. The data's here. You can search for a column, and kind of the reason it's here is this is where you're going to drag it into a visual. And so that's what these boxes are checked for, is because I've got a matrix here that I put some data in, and you can see, at a glance, like what's in there. Build, this is kind of where you choose what type it is. So if I click this matrix and then I click pie chart, it'll turn it into a pie chart. But it also shows you what's there. So we've got rows. category and subcategory, and that's what this is. Category is accessories, subcategory is the thing under it, and that follows this hierarchy. If I said, no, I want that the other way, which wouldn't make sense in this case, but you could drag this little box up. And then values, what am I showing in the cells? And I just dragged over sales amount. And so it's summing that automatically. And so you can kind of see that. This format one is unsurprisingly formatting, and you can search here, which is great because a lot of these have a million different properties. And so like if you wanted to know, how do I change the grid color? You can, it's probably under grid, but if you weren't sure, you could search grid color. And there's just like an infinite amount of things you can do with formatting almost. So, sky's the limit. This is a pretty close to default just for demonstration purposes. But you can change all your font size, and does it have a title? Does it have a border? Normal stuff like that. And then last but not least is filters. So this shows, what this is going to show depends on what you're looking at. So if I'm clicked into this graph, which I am now, it's showing that, basically the three things in the graph, in the matrix, exist as filters, but they're set to all, so they're not doing anything. If you wanted to, you could expand this down and say, oh, just show me bikes, and save it, and that's what that visual would do. But then if I click out of it, I'm not going to see any filters because I just set that on the visual. And that's why you see page and then all pages. So, you could say, I just want to show bikes everywhere because this is a report to the bikes team. So you could throw a filter in here, category is bikes, save it, and then that'll be this whole page. You don't have to set that anymore. So, always be aware of this, what it's showing, because it's not uncommon to run into, a situation where you're like, something's broken, I don't see my data. But then for somehow, maybe you did it or something you configured, put a filter in. So that's really the interface in a nutshell. This is pretty much what you're working with. There's a bar up top, and a lot of it repeats this stuff. But I'll point out a couple things that don't. What else? So yeah, this is kind of just more of the same. Yeah, you can see that what we're working with here. Now I'm clicked on a real simple column chart where I've got x-axis is year and quarter, and I don't have it expanded, so you can drill down into this. I can pop open Power BI in a second. By clicking this down button. Well, there's a couple ways to do it, but that's why you only see year, because it's not drilled down. So the drill down is another feature that you can use if you want to. And then a y-axis, again, is just count of sales order number. So what that is, that's all I wanted to know how many sales there were, not the total sales amount in dollars. So I just dragged sales order number over there because that's a unique thing per each sale. Then I just said, show me the count of that. So I can kind of start seeing some stuff. These are slicers. A slicer is just kind of a filter. Slice and dice goes back to sort of the old OLAP cube terminology. But the slicer icon is one of these little ones here. You could just click that, it'll pop one in. And depending on the kind of data, it'll look different and you can configure it. So, you might say, I want a drop down, or you want these check boxes. There's a way to make them buttons. If it's a date range, it'll kind of have some different formatting options for dates, whether it's a slider or type it in. So slicers are obviously another big thing you want to do. By default, these will apply to the whole page. There's a way to change that. I can show that later, but typically, you just drop it in. It's a page level filter essentially. So that'll filter all the data in these rows too. So a very important concept in Power BI is a filter context. So, if I look in this cell, the filter context of that cell is category is clothing, subcategory is gloves. Then if I click large, it adds that. It's, class is large. And then if I click this 2013, all this other stuff will change because that's at least what it does by default, is it filters, based on navigating, clicking around in visuals, and that changes the filter context once again. And so that's like a key thing, especially when you're writing measures in DAX, just kind of thinking through what filter context do I want? Maybe I want this to show a total that is not filtered by clothing. And there's ways to do that with the calculate function. That's kind of its whole point, is to describe a measure and then tell it what filter context you want to use. What else? Yeah, so just showing a little bit of DAX. this is another place where it kind of looks like Excel formula language, but it's not. It's different. It's more like a query language. It's almost more like SQL, but even though it doesn't look really at all like SQL. Um, so another thing I like to do is I make explicit measures for sums, because there are some cases where the visual, for one thing, you might want to reuse it, like I'm doing here. And for another reason, some visuals like, do weird stuff with the auto-calculated sum, or it doesn't behave the way you want it to in terms of how it adds up down the rows and columns. So lots of times I make my own. So here we have sum of sales is sum X, and sum means basically I want to do a row by row iteration and sum that. And so that expects a table, which is this, and then it expects a statement, an expression, but here the expression is just this column. So that's going to go take the sales amount, zip down the entire fact internet sales table and sum it up. And then this will get calculated in whatever filter context it's in. So that's where the magic happens, is when I put this back into my same table, it's the same exact value because it's put in these filter contexts for each cell of the matrix on top of what we have here defined in the DAX code. And then there's these just similar, there's a lot of built-in functions you can use, like total, like year to date, total year to date. Cool, that's a built-in function. I can just go look it up in SQLBI.com and see what does it return and what arguments does it expect. So let's feed it sum of sales as a measure, and then what's your date that you're going to use for the year to date calculation. So when I make that, and I should also say this, I like to put them in a measures table. So these are really, you would think that this is dealing with fact internet sales. So this is in the fact internet sales table, but it's really not. These are like standalone. You're telling it what to use to calculate its value, but it doesn't really go with that table. So for organizational purposes, I will often make a measures table and put them all in there. Because once you get 10 or 12 measures inside of a table with 50 or 60 fields, like you're going to be looking around and confusing yourself. I've definitely been there, so I just do it this way now. And then this is showing us that sum year to date appears to work because that value goes up, and then when it's a new year, it goes back down to 0. So real simple to do certain types of things like that. All right, yeah, this is a AI generated slide. It kept sticking radio telescopes in, so I decided to roll with it. All right, how about now for questions, comments?
I appreciate you sharing your thought process with us.
Yeah,
The
no
logic
problem.
makes, yeah, so helpful.
Yeah, sure. Glad to do it. I enjoy working in Power BI, but it's kind of a mindset. Like if I go a couple weeks doing different type of work and then jump back into it, I kind of always have to stop and be like, okay, filter context, row context, DAX, and then get going again. So here's where I pulled that stuff from. And so like if we click into, you can, use these slicers. They just kind of do this. There's a way to limit what they apply to. Is that in sync slicers? Yeah, so this is where you can sync slicers across pages. And so like you might want like one master color slicer that applies to all pages. You can set whether these are actually doing that or not. Page 1, page 2, synced, yes or no. Or visible basically means it works on that page, yes or no. Let's see. Likewise for the year, kind of almost any visual is going to be live like that. Okay, that's all that was. What else did I say I was going to show? Where's there was something else I was thinking of, and I can't remember what it was. Well, I guess just maybe it was this. The main navigation-wise, this is the other thing. So there's really like 3 main views in Power BI. And so we're in this data report view one. And so the table view is another one that you're probably going to use a lot, and it allows you to look at the tables, filter for columns like, where do I have sales mentioned? Oh yeah, I want to look at this. You can jump over there. You can set up some filtering and sorting here. Like, oh yeah, like which column is sorted by which thing can be important. So like if I go over to the dim date table, month number, a lot of the cases you want to do this by like sort by column year month. So this is like a lot of times people will do all this and get in there and they build a line graph or a bar chart, and they see that their dates are not chronological in the way they're sorted on the graph. So what that, like if I wanted to show month number on my bar chart and I see it going 1, 2, 7, 7, 6, it probably means I just need to say, hey, month number, you got to sort by the actual date. And so that's what this does. Oh no, that one won't work because it's redundant. You have to make sure. I might not be able to do it because I didn't put in a numeric. It can't be, it has to be like unique values is what it's telling us here. Yeah. But what I would do to use that is actually cram together year, month, day, and then they'd be unique as a number basically. And you could say sort by that. And then you don't ever have to use that column because it's ugly. It's just like 20, 012, 01, 01. And then here's where you can see the code that it's using. And then lastly, there is this data model view. So this is where you can see how this all ended up getting laid out. Yeah, remembering that these came from, everything here came from AdventureWorks except for this thing. But then I said, all right, cool, I want to use that in my data. So I'm going to relate zip code column in this table to postal code column in dim geography. So now if I wanted to like show this by the geography of the sales, I could. This is a DAX query editor. This is actually pretty cool. I haven't used it a lot yet because I'm so used to it not existing. But you can write and test DAX code in here. Yeah. So I usually just say evaluate some DAX expression and run it. So you can, just test live and it's got a little bit of ability to format and, highlights things based on the color to kind of show you what it is. Is this a function or is this a input? So that's there. What else? Power query side. So if I go to transform data, we can pop back open Power Query, and then you can kind of see, yeah, so there's some stuff to point out here, I guess. Like what you've got is these applied steps on the right, and that is exactly what it sounds like. So if I decide to delete a column right now, I get a new step. So this is kind of nice because you always have this clean documentation of what was done, and you can click on them. Like I can go click back to source and see what it's doing, which this is just saying like, where are you getting the table from? These are the schemas in Snowflake. And then navigation just means I navigated to that table I wanted, which these two things get done for you when you do the new query. So if I say new source, more Snowflake, and then I go find my server name. This is like the hardest part about this is remembering the format that it wants for this. Oh, let's see, that is in Data Vault development. Yeah. Supposed to look like that. And then Snowflake has the idea of a warehouse, which are really, that one it's called. Yeah, that's what it's called, which are really like buckets of compute. So Snowflake separates out storage from compute. So you can, this is a extra small warehouse, so it's real cheap to run. But you have to tell it which one you want to use. So I've already authenticated here, so it's not going to ask me to log in. Otherwise, it would ask you to log in. And you can use, I'd use like a service account, make a service account that has the permissions you want and use that. So I believe it's in, yeah, this is like the landing zone for that, what do you call it? VentureWorks. So there's a bunch of stuff here. So you can just pick one. I don't think we have this one. And it'll pull it in. And here, yeah, this is like the import a direct query. I definitely want to do import. These aren't too huge. I don't mind, keeping them in the data set, in the file. And so, yeah, you can see now you've got source and navigation done. And now you can do stuff like choose columns. Another helpful thing about doing choose columns up front is that let's just take a couple out and say, okay. And then let's go look at the code it came up with. So it removed other columns and then selected the columns we're keeping, which is good because if somebody goes, if your data team goes around and they add 7 more columns to this view in Snowflake, it'd be better if that didn't break your report. So here it's just saying keep these columns by name. If there's other ones that show up in here later, this will still run. So that's kind of another reason to add a step like that, even if it's just selecting all of them. And then, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff here. Transform, so, basically transform and add column have a lot of similar functionalities. It just the add column will give you a new column. Transform will just do the transformation. So like I could split date time by delimiter and just say, put in an empty space. And now I have date and time. And you can just double click these things and rename them.
Hey, Andrew, you did
Yep.
have a couple questions in the chat.
Oh, perfect. Thanks. Sorry. I opened that window. Let's see. Oh, how to turn on the buttons. Okay, let's look at that. Let's close this. Close and apply will re-import the data. So if you don't want to do that right now, you can say close. Eventually it'll make you if you try to do certain things, but I believe the button deal is in options and settings, file options and settings, options. I think it's on object interaction, even though that's not like the feature that is the buttons. I think that's what it is, but it's in here somewhere. It's one of the preview features if you're not getting it by default. And if it's not, if you don't see these options the same way, the best way to install Power BI Desktop is actually, and I hate to say it, from the Microsoft Store, because that keeps itself updated and on the current version, at least last I knew, rather than just downloading it somewhere from Microsoft. You might end up with a slightly older version that doesn't auto update. I don't know if that's still the case, but as of like 6 months ago, it was true. All right. If you filter in that table view, will it change the visuals? Let's see. What do you mean by that, Chris Austin? That maybe he means this. And discard what we did. Maybe he means this. I don't know. Like if you click in tables, it typically will. There's a oh.
I was talking about, so on the very far left where you have the more buttons and settings, you have the tab 1 being the visual, yeah, the table view.
Okay.
If you go to the table view, not the schemas, the second one, the table view.
Yep.
If you filter these columns in which you did, will this have any effect on my visuals?
The sort will affect them depending on what it is. It sort of determines the order. I believe that the filtering here does apply, yes. Like, let's see, let's test it. I'm pretty certain. I just usually don't filter there. Let's look at like a product category. No, I guess not. I think that's just for navigating and looking at it. The sort does, though. The sort affects what order things are in visuals. But if you do this in Power Query, it does for sure. Like it'll take it out and it won't ever get over to this side. I don't know. What else? Anything you want to see? Here's a slightly different one. I run a DayZ server, and it's got like a bunch of nasty configuration files for determining like where stuff is in the game. And I got tired of not really being able to see what I was working with. And this is not really aesthetically tweaked. It's kind of utilitarian, but this actually shows where zombies spawn on this map. And I can see like by the different kind of zombie, what their counts are and where they are. And this one is for like where the AI patrols are on the map. So you can kind of set these up so that somebody might come across like a squad and have to have a gun battle. So I kind of use this to help me see where is stuff, where do I not have coverage. And these are kind of interesting because these come from XML and JSON files that are a little bit nasty, but it does work pretty well. So I think I let Power BI, the reason it built these helper queries in that case was I did the new source, isn't there like a JSON one or something? Yeah, XML or JSON. If you use these, it'll parse it and make like helper functions to parse out the stuff that's nested in your XML and your JSON. So this looks kind of nasty. I would probably rename some of it, but what you get at the end then is like a nice flat table where the source file was kind of a mess. Like download the bike store database. Yeah, the bike store database is, I'll post it. Let me see. That is EW. Microsoft has it hosted somewhere. Here it is. And those are the SQL Server files. So you technically have to like start SQL Server and import that as a backup. If you want some text version or assistance on how to actually do that, let me know. I've got code for that because obviously it's something I do all the time for testing.